I'm Young-Key Kim-Renaud. I am Professor Emeritus of Korean Language and Culture and International Affairs. My current research is actually the relationship between language and personal, individual, or national identity. And right now I'm actually working about how Koreans have viewed their own language, especially written language, in view of the historical context. So as their own perception of their own culture and where it stands on the world stage, it has evolved. And of course, it followed a political, historical, and social change as a kind of real fact and also their own perception. And I guess others' perception of them. When I was growing up, our family happened to receive lots of foreign guests as well as different kinds of Korean guests. My mother especially was very open to different kinds of people, including the people totally in other areas than her own specialization of, she was a writer. So when I saw all these people, even as a very young girl, I was fascinated by differences of these people. I had all kinds of different varieties of English. It was same even in college, because one of my teachers was from deep south in the States, and she taught us to say "in my house" and things like that. So we all began imitating her, but then realized it was a different kind of English. So sound system actually attracted me. And also I took a few courses because I was in the English department, but linguistics was taught in that department. And I was really very attracted by the fact it was both, it had the appearance of being both humanities and sciences. So I really loved this idea of marriage between the humanities and the sciences. So I applied to go to the States to study. And at that time, there was a different kinds of theories. And I happened to be actually one of the pioneers in Korean linguistics. I was one of the very early people who came to study modern linguistics. Of course, Korea has a long tradition of very powerful linguists, actually, including the king who invented the Korean alphabet. But this modern so-called generative linguistics was just being becoming very influential, not only for linguistics, but as an analytic tool. So I became very interested in the beginning, really theoretical issues, especially how the sound system is affected by our natural physical shape, because we use our vocal tract, which is used for eating and breathing. So they interact to actually to make distinctive sounds that will be both communicative, also emotive, so that because language, you need to have messages across, but also those messages include how you feel about a person, interlocutor, or referent, or the whole situation. So these two things actually are very I guess, focus of what linguists do. And that happened to be my own too. And I was deeply interested in knowing what makes, languages, what are universals, because there are so many commonalities because we are all human beings born with the same faculty, and human relationships are really all relatable. And all these things fascinated me. But Koreans have two very language-specific characteristics. One is we have this so-called the honorific system. So you cannot open your mouth without thinking what that person stands, and then what the other person or things that you are talking about stand in our speech context. So that's called the honorifics. That is something I expanded to later, because when I was working at the, right after my dissertation, I was hired by the National Science Foundation. I worked there as assistant program director. I was the youngest one of all the program directors at that time. And I read so many interesting proposals, and a very famous French linguist, Meillet, said everything somehow holds together. This is where you really saw it. And then you realize in order to go deep, you really need to see wide. This is just like how kids learn their language. So their data is very limited in the beginning. As they grow, it expands, so their hypotheses have to change. This is exactly how linguists study. They are like little children learning the language. So in the beginning, I was very interested in very specific, rule-governed workings of language, trying to find the reasons in the anatomy, in the aerodynamics, and then also relational, because to be distinctive, sounds are somehow related to some others, and then in opposition to others. So those were my initial interests. Later on, as I studied the Korean writing system, which was very much based on contemporary linguistic theory, it was a natural step to go into seeing what might have been. Fortunately, the Korean language has already all the treatises written out. We discovered the original document in 1940. So although it was invented in the 15th century, we do have very specific record of the scientific underpinnings of this invention. So I began being interested. The other one is the writing system also reflects very Korean-specific phenomenon called the sound symbolism. So you have no arbitrary, like onomatopoeia, kind of it imitates the sound, but it's not really systematic, right? But Korean sound symbolism covers all feelings, not just sounds. The visual, taste, or some feeling of feel, like in tight, or all these things are expressed by the Korean language, and the inventor of the alphabet caught it. So something called vowel harmony, and then consonantal strength, all that is caught by the Korean writing system. So I began being very interested. And then I expanded into the much more social and political and historical aspects of how this, because before the invention of the Korean alphabet, we used to use Chinese characters in various forms. In the beginning, of course, we just used as a chunk of borrowed monosyllables, right? Later on, since Korean is typologically so different, their syntax is so different, we need lots of endings. You need the sound-based writing system, which Chinese is a combination, couldn't use. So they began inventing their own, deriving from the Chinese, but it was just too cumbersome. So they began using Chinese, just like a foreign language. So they became kind of de facto bilinguals in writing. They didn't speak Chinese, just they used the writing. And then, so that was the most, you know, the authentic form of knowledge, because that's how they chose civil service employees, the highest positions, or they went to those people who could control the Chinese language like their own. And then with the invention of the alphabet, suddenly the groups they didn't have voice became to have voice. There were even legal participation by women, as Jisoo Kim would show you. There are the Buddhist texts, and all these suddenly came to be available to people who didn't know Chinese. And so it became really kind of underground writing system. So they were kind of two strata of written language used by the country. And then later on, we would have this recent history of terrible occupation by the Japanese, and the Japanese tried to even take the language away. And then there was suddenly a consciousness by especially linguists saying, yeah, we have actually this. Nobody can take this away. Koreans were, proud of many other things, like invention, of the, of the, the printing and the astronomy and the first ironclad ship and all that. But they are kind of already, they are similar things in human culture, right? But writing system, they said, there's none like Korean. And this consciousness actually became very strong when we were occupied by the Japanese. And then the language threatened. So we began having a different kind of self-awareness. And then when we were freed, we were liberated from the Japanese, there was this so-called Purification Movement. So they were getting rid of all the foreign loanwords and all that. But then they decided Chinese is also foreign. We have actually this very good writing system. Why should we use? So with every new education minister, we had a new policy about Chinese characters. But right now it's a very different generation, right? You have a K-pop generation, and they are actually appropriating even the foreign language in their own way. And some literature talks about, this stuffy people using Chinese characters. It's just a very different kind of attitude towards the, the different writing system, and they think they found their own place by actually being themselves and using just something that easy. Because before they said it's so easy. How can it be? How can you call yourself civilized when it's something so easy? But then, right now, with China rising, they say they are learning Chinese again as a foreign language. So this actually, language reflects not only the basic human quality, but also it reflects how you view yourself and you view others, and how you actually try to be in a polite society without, making others lose their faith or making yourself lose your faith. Since I was lucky enough to be one of the very first to study the Korean language in a more, contemporary context, I guess I introduced really, I made lots of, I aroused lots of interest from the world stage. So I'm kind of still one of the most quoted, especially my PhD dissertation is one of the, after so many years, I don't even know, maybe 50, 60 years, not 50, 74. So it was still, for decades, it has been quoted a lot, not only by Korean linguists, but others. So let's say kind of, it was like, a beginner's luck in a way. But then I tried not to be too tied by a particular theory, but I tried to understand what's going on and then presented it as a kind of question and then tried to partially answer it. So it challenged many other dissertations. So that will be actually my direct contribution in linguistics. But on the other hand, I was always conscious of putting everything in a bigger context. So the role of linguistics in making Korean studies kind of part of authentic world academic pursuit, I think kind of I put a little seed on it. But because I assumed administrative roles often, like as the president of Korean Linguistic International Circle of Korean Linguistics, and also as its editor for a long time, I tried to make Korean studies really something worthwhile academically from the world point of view. I didn't want to do Korean studies just to say, here, I am here too. It's really not that. I really wanted to contribute in my small way to world civilization. So everywhere I went, my first effort was to be very recognized part of East Asian culture and civilization, and of course, linguistic domain. So I think not only at GW, everywhere, I took it as a kind of mission, not to propagandize Korea, but to help the world so that we all have a better understanding of that particular culture and its place in a bigger world context.